My name is Evelyn Carter. I was 38 years old when I sat at the end of a boardroom table and watched my younger sister steal 14 years of my life in under 10 minutes. Madison stood beneath the projector lights, smiling like a savior, telling the board she had rescued our family company from the edge of bankruptcy. My father wiped his eyes. My mother pressed a hand to her chest. The directors applauded, and I said nothing. Then Harold Bennett, the independent chair of our board, opened the original audit file on his laptop, looked straight at me, and asked the question that drained every drop of color from Madison's face. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "if your sister saved this company, why is your signature on every document that kept it alive?" The room went still. Madison's smile stayed frozen in place, but her eyes had already started searching the table for someone to rescue her. Before I tell you what happened after that question, I need you to understand something. Some betrayals do not begin with shouting or lawyers or doors slamming in the night. Some begin quietly with a family dinner, a proud smile, and a younger sister everyone believes before you even open your mouth. If you have ever been overlooked by the people who should have seen you first, stay with me, because this story is about the kind of truth that waits years before it finally walks into the room. And if it speaks to something you have lived, subscribe and follow along, because there is more to this than one boardroom and one question. Harold's question did not come from nowhere. It was built from 14 years of silence, of unpaid loyalty, of late nights and hidden paperwork, and of every single moment my family decided that Madison simply looked more like a leader than I ever could. So let me take you back 14 years. Before the boardroom, before the audit file, before my sister learned how easy it was to steal credit from someone who never fought for applause. 14 years earlier, I was 24, freshly graduated with an accounting degree, and still foolish enough to believe that hard work would eventually speak for itself. I was the oldest daughter of Richard and Elaine Carter, and I came into Carter and Wexley through the side door, not the front one. There was no welcome lunch, no announcement on the company floor, no proud speech from my father. I started in a narrow office beside the storage room, surrounded by filing cabinets, old invoices, and the steady hum of fluorescent lights that never quite turned off. On paper, my job was simple: reconcile the accounts, prepare the reports, fix the mistakes. But inside that small office, month after month, I quietly became the only person in the building who knew exactly where every dollar went. Madison was 5 years younger than me, and from the moment she walked into a room, people seemed to make space for her. She had my mother's bright smile, my father's easy confidence, and the kind of warmth that made strangers feel like they had known her for years. While I learned balance sheets and vendor ledgers, Madison learned handshakes, dinner conversations, and how to make important people laugh at charity events. My parents called her natural leadership. The employees called her the future. Clients remembered her name after a single meeting. And Madison understood exactly what all of that meant. She did not need to know how the company actually worked behind closed doors, because everyone had already decided she looked like someone who should run it. In our family, I was useful. Madison was special. And the part I am almost ashamed to admit is this: even after years of being treated that way, some quiet corner of me still wanted my parents to look at me, just once, and see more than the daughter who fixed problems after everyone else had already gone home. Carter and Wexley was not just a company to us. It was my grandfather's name, carved into brick and steel, attached to every paycheck that kept dozens of families standing. He started it in 1979 with 2 delivery trucks, a rented warehouse outside Columbus, Ohio, and a promise that no employee would ever be treated like a number. By the time my parents took over, The company supplied industrial equipment to hospitals, schools, and manufacturing plants across 3 states. At family dinners, my father called it our legacy. My mother called it everything your grandfather built. But the older I got, the more I realized that the word legacy meant something different to each person at the table. From the beginning, my place in the family was never a mystery. I was the dependable one, the quiet one. The daughter who could be trusted with receipts, passwords, payroll folders, and the kinds of problems no one wanted to explain out loud. When I was 16, my father watched me sort a box of unpaid invoices and said, "Evelyn has a good head for paperwork." He meant it as praise, but even then, I understood the limit hiding inside those words. Paperwork was useful. Leadership was admired. Madison was encouraged to speak at school fundraisers, to shake hands with adults, to practice confidence in front of a crowd. I was asked to double-check the numbers before dinner. No one ever called me weak. They said something worse. They said I was practical, steady, behind the scenes, the kind of person a leader needs, but never the leader herself. By the time Madison turned 23, my parents had already begun presenting her like an heir. She sat beside my father at client dinners. She walked the trade show floors with my mother. She appeared in the company photos in tailored blazers while I stayed upstairs closing the month-end reports. Investors heard her laugh before they ever saw our balance sheets. Clients shook her hand and said, "You must be the future of Carter and Wexley." My father never corrected them. He just smiled, as if the compliment somehow belonged to him. Madison learned quickly that being seen could be mistaken for being valuable. And every time she stepped into another room full of important people, I was the one in the back office making sure the numbers she quoted were actually true. For years, I saved Carter and Wexley in ways that no one ever toasted, photographed, or mentioned at a holiday party. I caught a duplicate vendor payment before it cost us $42,000. I found a payroll tax error 3 days before the penalties would have hit. I noticed a supplier clause that could have raised our costs by 12% and sent the correction to legal before anyone signed it. Every time something went wrong, my father would drop a folder on my desk and say, "Evelyn, can you take a quick look at this?" A quick look usually meant 3 nights of unpaid overtime, a thermos of coffee gone cold by midnight, and a quiet kind of panic I never let anyone see. And when the problem disappeared, Madison was praised for keeping the clients calm, while I filed the corrected documents back into a cabinet that no one opened unless something was already on fire. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself that for a long time. The first real crack appeared on a Monday morning in March, when 3 problems landed on my desk before 9 in the morning. The tax authority had sent a notice about unpaid payroll taxes from 2 years earlier. Our bank had flagged our credit line for review, and a major hospital contract, worth more than anything we had booked that quarter, contained a payment clause so badly written that it could choke off our cash flow for months. My father called it a rough patch. My mother called it temporary pressure. Madison called it nothing we should overreact to, but when I opened the numbers, I felt my stomach turn cold. This was not pressure. This was a collapse wearing a polite suit. I stayed after everyone else had gone home that night and rebuilt the cash flow forecast line by line. By 47 minutes before midnight, the answer was sitting in front of me, cruel and simple. If the tax notice triggered penalties, if the bank froze our credit line, and if the hospital delayed payment under that broken clause, Carter and Wexley would run out of operating cash in 90 days. Not a year, not 6 months, 90 days. Payroll would fail first. Then the suppliers would stop shipping. Then the hospital contract would fall apart, and it would take our reputation down with it. I printed the report and sat there staring at my grandfather's framed photo on the wall. Dozens of employees walked through our doors every morning, believing my family knew exactly what it was doing. And I was the only person in the building looking at the proof that we were almost out of time. The next morning, I brought the numbers to my parents. My father skimmed the first page, then closed the folder as if the paper itself had offended him. "We cannot let the board panic," he said. My mother nodded and reminded me that confidence matters in business. Madison leaned against the window, scrolling through her phone, and told us we needed better optics, not fear. By lunchtime, she had posted a photo from a networking brunch with the caption, "Big things ahead for Carter and Wexley." I watched employees like the post from their desks, with no idea that the company paying their mortgages was 90 days from running out of cash. That was the moment something in me quietly changed. I stopped waiting for permission. That week, I began rebuilding the company from the only place my family had ever allowed me to stand, behind the numbers. I pulled 5 years of bank statements, vendor contracts, tax notices, payroll reports, and unpaid invoices into one locked spreadsheet. I stayed past midnight, highlighting every expense we could cut without firing a single worker. I called our tax attorney before sunrise and asked what could be negotiated before the penalties became public. Then I contacted the bank myself, not as a Carter daughter, but as the one person who could explain exactly where the money had gone and exactly how we could survive. Every night, while Madison attended dinners and talked about vision, I sat under those fluorescent lights, building the plan that would keep her stage from collapsing beneath her feet. The hospital contract was the piece that could either save us or bury us. It was worth $4.7 million. But one careless clause gave the hospital the right to delay the first major installment by 120 days. We did not have 120 days, so I rewrote the cash flow projection, attached the supplier timelines, and sent the bank a revised repayment plan at 6:18 on a Thursday morning. Then I called the hospital's procurement office and negotiated an amended payment schedule tied to deliveries milestones. By Friday afternoon, the bank had agreed to keep our credit line open. The hospital signed the correction. Carter and Wexley could breathe again. No one clapped. No one even knew. And here is the part that still sits with me. While I was negotiating with the bank, I pulled the old project files to compare language, and I found something I had not let myself notice before. 2 years earlier, a cost-saving initiative I had designed had been presented to the board under Madison's name. 3 years before that, a vendor renegotiation I had built from scratch carried her signature on the summary page. It was not the first time. It had been happening quietly for years, one folder at a time, while I told myself it did not matter. The pattern had a shape now, and the shape was a decision someone had made about me a long time ago. Madison came to my office 3 days after the bank approved the revised plan. She closed the door behind her, holding one of her expensive coffees, and gave me the smile she always used when she wanted something to sound harmless. "Dad wants me to present the recovery plan to the board next week," she said. "You know how he gets with technical details. Can you send me your files? I will just clean them up, make them easier for people to follow." I should have heard the warning buried in that sentence, but she sounded gentle that day, almost grateful, almost like the sister I kept hoping she could still be. And I was exhausted, running on 4 hours of sleep, and the foolish hope that saving the company mattered more than the credit for it. So I sent her everything: the spreadsheet, the bank summary, the hospital amendment, the 47-page restructuring plan. I thought I was helping the family. I was handing my sister the weapon she would use to erase me. At first, Madison only changed the colors, the fonts, the order of the slides. Then she changed the words. "Prepared by Evelyn Carter" became "Financial Recovery Strategy," presented by Madison Carter. My detailed notes disappeared. My initials vanished from the appendix. The bank emails were summarized without my name anywhere on the page. By the time she was finished, the plan still carried my fingerprints on every number, but her name sat on every page that mattered. She did not steal it loudly. She did it cleanly, with polished bullet points and a title slide that made her look like the architect of a rescue she barely understood. That was the first time I understood that my sister was not just using my work. She was replacing me. I found out 2 days before the presentation. Madison had left the revised deck open on the conference room screen, probably because she never imagined I would be the one to walk in early and check the projector. I stood there in the empty room, staring at my own work, wearing her name like a stolen dress. When I confronted her, she did not even look embarrassed. She closed her laptop slowly and said, "Don't make this ugly, Evelyn. The family needs one clear voice right now." I asked her why my name had been removed. She sighed, as if I were being childish. "Because you are not the face people trust. You are the person who makes things work in the background. There is nothing wrong with that." Then she smiled and added the line I will never forget. "Stay quiet for the family. Isn't that what you have always been good at?" I did not answer. I just looked at her, and for the first time, I stopped seeing my sister. I saw a person who had been quietly counting on my silence for years. The presentation changed everything. My parents watched Madison stand before the board with my numbers, my plan, and my stolen confidence, and instead of questioning any of it, they looked relieved. That evening, my father called me into his office, with my mother sitting beside him, her hands folded as if a verdict had already been reached. "The board responded well to Madison," he said. "Your mother and I believe it is time to prepare her as the next chief executive." I waited for him to mention my work. He did not. My mother reached over and touched my arm. "You should be proud," she said gently. "You helped make this possible." Helped. That was the word they chose for the woman who had saved the entire company. I asked my father what my role would be if Madison became chief executive. He leaned back in his chair, uncomfortable for the first time, and said, "You will remain essential, Evelyn. No one understands the back office the way you do." Back office. The words landed harder than I expected. My mother tried to soften them. "Your sister needs someone steady beside her, someone who can handle the details while she leads." I looked at both of them, and I finally understood something that took my breath away. They had not misunderstood what I had done. They knew. They knew I had rebuilt the books, negotiated with the bank, protected the hospital contract, and kept dozens of people employed. They simply believed my work belonged under Madison's name, because her smile looked better at the front of a boardroom. I was not being overlooked by accident. I was being assigned a place beneath her. I did not argue that night. I did not cry in front of them, and I did not beg for credit from people who had already decided I was easier to erase than Madison was to question. I simply nodded, walked back to my office, and locked the door. Then I opened a new folder on my computer and named it Originals. Into it, I copied everything. The first draft of the recovery plan, the bank emails, the hospital amendment, the tax attorney's notes, the call logs, the file metadata, every saved version of Madison's edited presentation, the older folders too, the ones from 2 and 3 years earlier, where my work already wore her name. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to be understood. I started preparing to be undeniable. Harold Bennett was the only person on our board who never clapped easily. He was 71, a retired audit partner with silver hair, sharp eyes, and the uncomfortable habit of reading the footnotes while everyone else watched the speaker. During Madison's presentation, I noticed him studying the appendix instead of her smile. He asked one quiet question about the bank covenant, and Madison answered with a phrase lifted almost word for word from slide 12. Harold did not react. He only wrote something small in his notebook. 2 days later, he requested the original audit file, not the polished board version. Then he asked the accounting department for the full document history. No one warned Madison. No one warned my parents. But when I saw Harold's request appear in the system log, I knew the first crack had opened in the story my sister was trying to sell. Before I tell you what Harold found in those files, let me ask you something. Have you ever worked in silence while someone louder, prettier, or more favored took the credit for what you built? Have you ever watched your own family clap for the person who erased you? If you have, write the words "I know that feeling" in the comments. Because sometimes the most painful betrayal is not when strangers fail to see you. It is when the people who raised you look directly at your work and choose someone else's name for it. Stay with me, because what Harold uncovered next did not just expose Madison, it exposed my entire family. The board meeting was set for the following Thursday at 9 in the morning, in the glass conference room on the 14th floor. Madison arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a white blazer and gold earrings, carrying the kind of calm that made people believe she had already won. My parents took their seats near the head of the table, looking proud and nervous in equal measure. 11 board members settled in around them, coffee cups in front of them, tablets open, folders neatly stacked. I sat at the far end of the table, exactly where I had been placed for years. Close enough to answer questions, far enough to be forgotten. Madison glanced at me once, a soft and warning kind of look. Then the screen behind her lit up with the title, Carter and Wexley Recovery Strategy, presented by Madison Carter. And for the first time, I did not look away. Madison began like she had rehearsed in front of a mirror for days. Her voice was warm, steady, almost humble. She spoke about difficult decisions, about restoring lender confidence, about protecting the hospital partnership during a critical period. Every phrase sounded polished enough to be printed in a press release. My father watched her with wet eyes. My mother pressed a hand to her chest, proud enough to forget who had actually stayed awake, building the plan. The board members nodded along as Madison clicked through slides full of my numbers, my projections, my emergency cuts, my revised payment schedule. She called it leadership. I called it theft with better lighting. When she finished, the room filled with the kind of applause that makes a lie feel official. My father stood first, clapping slowly, his face shining with pride. My mother wiped under one eye and whispered, "Your grandfather would be so proud." A few board members traded approving glances. Someone said Madison had shown executive maturity. Someone else called her the clear choice for continuity. The vote to recommend her as the next chief executive was placed on the agenda, and for a moment it felt like the whole room had already decided the ending. Madison lowered her eyes with practiced humility, accepting praise for a rescue she had only ever performed in a slide deck. I sat still at the end of the table, my hands folded over my notebook. I could feel the folder of originals in my bag, heavy against the leg of my chair. Then Harold Bennett cleared his throat. He did not raise his voice. He simply opened his laptop, connected it to the screen, and said, "Before we vote, I would like to verify the source documents behind this recovery plan." The first file appeared on the wall, the original audit summary, dated 6 weeks earlier. My name was on the cover, not Madison's. Then came the bank emails, every one of them addressed to me. The hospital amendment, signed by me. The call log showing 23 conversations between me, the lender, and our legal counsel. Finally, Harold enlarged the document history, the part no one ever thinks to clean. Every major file had been created by Evelyn Carter. Every polished slide had been edited later by Madison Carter. The applause died without anyone saying a word. Harold turned back to Madison with the calm of a man who had already read the last page. "Since you led this recovery, he said. Please explain the bank covenant in section 7.3. Madison blinked once, then twice. Her smile stayed in place, but only barely. Of course, she said, glancing toward the screen. It refers to maintaining lender confidence during the restructuring period. Harold waited a beat. That is not what it says. The room became so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming above us. He asked again, slower this time. What specific condition allowed the bank to keep the credit line open without triggering default? Madison looked toward my father, then my mother, then down at her notes, as if the answer might appear there if she stared hard enough. For the first time all morning, the woman who claimed to have saved the company could not explain how it had been saved. Harold turned to me next. Evelyn, he said, can you answer the question? I did not stand. I did not smile. I simply opened the folder in front of me and found the page I had carried for weeks. Section 7.3 allowed the bank to keep our credit line open if we reduced operating expenses by 11% over 2 quarters, resolved the payroll tax liability under a formal payment agreement, and secured an amended payment schedule on the hospital contract. I looked around the table, then went on. That condition was met on April 14th at 4:32 in the afternoon, when the hospital signed the amendment and the bank confirmed by email. This time, no one interrupted me. After that, the truth did not need any drama. It only needed witnesses. Our tax attorney confirmed that I had negotiated the payment agreement. The bank representative, on speakerphone, confirmed that I had been the primary contact for every restructuring call. Our operations director admitted that I was the one who found the flaw in the hospital contract before it could strangle our cash flow. Then Harold opened the email chain, the one where Madison had asked me to send the technical version so she could simplify it for the board. No one moved. Madison's face had gone completely still. My father stared down at the table. My mother looked at me like she was seeing, for the very first time, the person who had been sitting in front of her for 38 years. And I understood something quietly devastating in that moment. My family had never lacked the proof. They had only lacked the willingness to believe me. Then Harold turned to my parents. Richard, Elaine, did either of you know that Evelyn prepared the original recovery plan? My father opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother gripped the edge of the table. We knew she helped, she said weakly. Harold's expression did not change. This was not help. This was authorship. Another board member leaned forward and asked why Madison had been presented as the successor when the evidence clearly showed that Evelyn had led the actual rescue. My father finally said the quiet thing out loud. Madison was better suited to represent the family. The words hung in the air like smoke. For the first time, everyone in that room heard what I had lived with for years. Image had always mattered more than truth. The vote never happened. Harold closed his laptop and called for an immediate executive session without Madison in the room. By noon, the board had suspended her succession recommendation. By 3 p.m, my parents were informed that they would step back from daily operations pending an internal review. No one shouted, no one slammed a door, and that was what made it so much worse for Madison. Her punishment did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like procedure. Her name was removed from the leadership transition memo. Her access to the strategic files was restricted. An outside audit firm was brought in. The employees were told only that the leadership process had been paused for governance reasons. Madison stood in the hallway outside the conference room, still wearing the white blazer she had chosen for her coronation, while the future she had stolen quietly disappeared behind a closed door. When she finally found me near the elevators, her voice cracked with anger. "You humiliated me." I looked at the white blazer, the same one she had worn to accept my life's work, and I said, "No, Madison, I only stopped protecting your lie." For the first time all day, my sister had no speech prepared. Later that afternoon, Harold asked me if I would accept the role of interim chief executive. For 1 second, the whole room seemed to wait for the simple ending, the overlooked daughter finally taking the chair her sister had tried to steal. But I shook my head. "Not like this," I said. "I will not inherit a broken system just because it finally broke in my favor." I told the board I would return only if Carter and Wexley became a real company instead of a family stage. Independent oversight, annual audits, clear, written authority, no more titles handed out because someone looked good standing beside my father. If they wanted me to lead, they would have to give me power, not pity. 1 year later, Carter and Wexley no longer looked like a family secret dressed up as a company. We had independent oversight, clean audits, written authority, and employees who no longer had to wonder which Carter child was being protected that week. I accepted the role of chief executive only after the board had signed every condition I asked for. Madison was still with the company, but she was no longer standing above accountability. My parents came to dinner sometimes. The conversations were slower, quieter, and not yet fully healed. But they were honest. And honesty was already more than we had ever had before. The first dinner after all of it was almost painfully quiet. My mother set 4 plates on the table, then paused, as if she had finally understood how many years one chair had sat empty even while I was sitting in it. My father did not ask me to forget. He only looked at me across the table and said, "I should have seen you sooner." And for once in my life, I let the silence answer for me. I learned that sweet revenge is not always watching someone fall. Sometimes it is simply standing in the place where they tried to erase you, with your name on the door and your peace still intact. If this story reminded you of someone who once stole your credit, tell me in the comments what you would have done. Would you have stayed silent and gathered your proof, the way I did? Or would you have confronted them the moment you saw your name disappear? And if you believe that the truth always finds its way back into the room eventually, subscribe to the channel and follow along for more stories about betrayal, karma, and the kind of justice that finally brings a person home to themselves.